Have you ever poured months or maybe even years into something you believed was good and then quietly wondered whether any of it was even making a difference? I mean, let's face it, you were showing up. You kept learning, you keep taking that next step, but instead of seeing progress, you seem to just find another obstacle, some unanswered question, or another reason just to put it off. Eventually, discouragement begins asking, why am I even still trying? Maybe you felt that in your marriage, or maybe you felt it while raising a child, improving your health, or even returning to church, working towards a degree, or maybe it's just building something on the side. You believe what you're doing matters. At least you believed it when you started. But after enough time passes without visible results, discouragement really sets in and it begins to whisper a different story. Nothing is changing. Maybe this isn't working. Or maybe all this effort is just a giant waste of time. Welcome back to From Hollow to Holy. I'm your host, Justin, and this is Shadows, a series about quiet tactics Satan uses to pull us away from God, from truth, and sometimes from the person we're trying to become. Today, we're talking about discouragement. And I want to be honest from the get go. This is not something I've conquered. I'm not telling a story from some comfortable side of success where everything just worked out and I can finally explain what it all meant. Nope, I am still stuck smack dab in the middle of it. Over the last year, I've been working to build a new educational pathway for my pharmacy tech program where I teach. The vision is to help students, especially students in rural communities, begin as a pharmacy technician and then continue their education and potentially create a career path towards pharmacy school. It could give students opportunities they may not have believed were even available to them, especially in our rural area. And when I explain the idea to people, the response I get is usually positive. Sometimes I hear, that's awesome. Other times it's, that's a great idea. That could really help our students. And I'm grateful for the encouragement. But, I've also learned there's a difference between someone saying, that's a great idea, and having somebody actually help you move that idea forward. When I began, I had an outline. I had an example of an articulation agreement and an understanding about many of the academic requirements. I knew I wanted a pathway to accomplish, but what I did not know was everything I needed to do internally to just turn that from an idea into an actual real pathway. And I didn't know every progress. I didn't know exactly who needed to approve what or where or who to ask. And I didn't know always who had the answer to the question I was asking. So I started reaching out. I would ask questions, I would revise documents, I would try to follow up with those. And I contacted other schools and my school and my deans. And I tried to understand each requirement as it appeared. And when I reached a dead end, I looked for another way forward. There were definitely days when it felt less like I was building something and more like I was dragging it forward an inch or less at a time. That has probably been the most discouraging part. I believe in what the program could become, but much of the time that I've felt alone in trying just to make it happen, there have been moments where I've asked myself over and over again, why in the flip am I trying so hard when it feels like I'm the only one trying to move this forward? And beneath that question is even a more painful thought. Maybe my program is just a giant waste of time. That is pretty difficult for me to admit. This program matters to me. The students matter to me. And I've seen how education can change someone's direction, their confidence, and the sense of possibility. So I believe that this pathway could create something meaningful. But when the support feels absent and progress is difficult to see, it becomes easy to question more than just a project. You begin questioning yourself. You wonder whether you misunderstood the opportunity or whether you're trying to force something that no one else wants. And even times where you wonder whether your effort is accomplishing anything at all or whether you're just simply wearing yourself down, forcing that burnout. And normally, this is where a story like this would turn, right? No. This is where I would tell you about the meeting that changed everything. Maybe it's the agreement that finally got signed, or the moment when everyone suddenly recognized the value of the work. I don't have that moment yet. Not yet. The truth is, I don't have the ending to this story. I'm still building. I'm still asking questions, and I'm still trying to understand what comes next. And I think maybe that's exactly why this episode matters, because most of us do not have experience with discouragement after the story is over. We experience it right smack dab in the middle when we can't see whether any of our work is actually leading anywhere at all. Discouragement does not always tell us that the goal is wrong. Sometimes it simply tells us that continuing is pointless. And it takes the absence of visible results and presents it as proof that nothing meaningful is actually happening. And when we're tired, that lie can sound incredibly reasonable. You know, we may even believe that if God were truly involved in our work, the road would just somehow be just a little bit easier. The right people would just immediately understand, and the doors would just open, even if there was a small amount of resistance at first. The support would just appear exactly when we needed it. But you know what? The scriptures are filled with people who followed God and still experienced resistance, delay, uncertainty, and exhaustion at every single step. Faithfulness has never guaranteed an easy road. I think about Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, where Paul writes, "And let us not be weary in well doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." I've heard that verse a few times, but lately one phrase has really stood out to me: weary in well doing. Paul is acknowledging in this scripture that we can become tired while doing something good. Weariness is not always evidence that we're on the wrong road. Sometimes it simply means the road has been long. And that is what matters to me, because I have sometimes really treated my discouragement like it's some sort of evidence of my failure. I've just assumed that because the work feels lonely, maybe it simply doesn't matter. Because if the progress is slow, there must not be any progress. I just, like I can't see an outcome. Well, I guess there's really nothing ahead. But discouragement is just a feeling. It's not the verdict. It can tell us that we're tired, right? It can tell us that something has been extremely difficult. It can even reveal what we need help with, or it can help with counseling or rest, or even, hey, you need to take a different approach. But it cannot see the future. The central lie that sits behind discouragement is really pretty simple. Slow progress means no progress. It's simply not true. Galatians gives us a different image. It speaks of a harvest. The farmer doesn't plant a seed and expect fruit the following morning. For a time, the field may look almost exactly as it did before the seed was planted. The work is hidden, the growth is quiet. There's no applause coming from the soil. That farmer has to continue caring for something that has not become visible yet. And that does not mean every seed's going to grow exactly as expected. And it doesn't mean that every plan will unfold the way that we imagine. Sometimes we do need to change direction. Sometimes we need to accept correction. Or sometimes the outcome God gives us looks just a little bit different from the one we pictured in our head. In my case, a lot of different than the outcome I pictured in my head. But continuing faithfully does not mean blindly refusing to adapt. There is also a danger in abandoning good work simply because it's not produced quick recognition. I'm beginning to understand that the work I'm putting into my program may not become visible this semester. Heck, it may not make a name for me even this year. It may not even become everything I currently hope it'll be. And that's okay. Really. Not that I don't struggle, because honestly, I struggle with that. Part of me wants the visible win right now. I want an agreement to be finalized. I want the enrollment numbers to skyrocket. I want that proof that the hours that I have put in truly matter. And I want to the point at something and say, there, that is why I keep going. But perhaps the question I need to ask is not really when will everything I'm doing be seen by everyone? Perhaps the question really is, am I willing to keep doing good work while the outcome is still uncertain? And that question changes where I place my attention. Instead of trying to focus and control the entire result, I can just focus on the next faithful step, right? I can ask, is this work still worth pursuing? Or what can I do today? Where do I need better counseling? What needs to change, if any? And where do I need to place my faith in God's hands? Those questions leave the room for both faith and for wisdom. They allow us to continue without pretending that we know exactly how everything's going to turn out. And even though I can't see the point yet to the finished pathway, I can already see ways that the work has changed me. It has taught me how to advocate for students. It has required me to learn systems I don't fully still understand, but I am starting to understand. And it has pushed me to communicate with people and institutions that truly I wouldn't have contacted otherwise. It has shown me how much I care about building opportunities for people in both rural communities and in education. And it exposed something in me that I probably needed to confront. I often want visible results to reassure me that my work and sometimes that myself have value. But our worth cannot depend entirely on recognition. And faithfulness cannot always be measured by how quickly others respond. So maybe you're living inside your own unfinished story. Maybe you're trying to rebuild trust in a relationship and healing is slower than you hope. Or you're improving your health, but your body hasn't changed the way you expected. Maybe you're praying for someone you love and you don't see a difference in them yet, right? Or maybe you're like me and you're trying to build something that no one else fully understands. Or even just put simply, you're just trying to remain faithful through a season that feels ordinary, lonely, or maybe even unproductive. I can't promise that every outcome will look the way we want. And I'm not going to promise you that every closed door will eventually just open. I do not believe the absence of visible results automatically just simply means that God is absent. So this week, consider one area of your life where discouragement has been telling you just to stop, give up, and listen for the sentence it keeps repeating. Then ask yourself, what is one faithful step I can take just today, this hour, this moment? Not the entire plan, not everything that must happen this next week, next month, or even next year, but just identify that one step. Maybe it's just an honest conversation. Maybe it's one prayer, one application, or one revised plan. Or maybe it's just an attempt at something with just a little bit greater wisdom than you had before. And then after taking that step, allow the outcome to remain unfinished for a while. Because faith is not about pretending that the harvest is already here. Faith is planting another seed while the field still looks empty. If this episode brought someone to mind, someone who's tired, discouraged, or wondering whether their efforts matter, consider sharing it with them. Like always, thank you for listening to From Hollow to Holy, and until next time, remember, progress over perfection.